Hey everyone, let's dive right in. Today's explainer is unpacking a seriously fascinating and honestly pretty sprawling source narrative. Basically, it claims we are smack in the middle of a massive global financial clash. The speakers we're analyzing argue that a fundamental shift is happening right now in U.S. economic policy, and it touches literally everything from the Federal Reserve right down to what you see on your daily social media feeds. So why does this matter to us? Well, if this theory holds water, it completely redefines how money moves, how politicians survive, and even how information itself is weaponized. We are going to break down this giant, complex web of economic theories, political maneuvering, and information warfare. Since the source material bounces around a lot, jumping really fast from high-level monetary policy straight into specific internet drama, we've mapped out 6 distinct battlefields for you today. We'll look at the global financial clash, bypassing the Fed, rebuilding the American system, political donors, media psyops, and finally, a return to what they call the real world. Okay, so starting with Section 1, the global financial clash, or what the source describes as the war for the Federal Reserve. The speakers basically structure their whole argument around this massive global showdown. On one side, you've got what they call the British system. They claim this is headquartered in the City of London and Wall Street. It runs entirely on debt, and it's built to benefit globalist financiers. But on the exact opposite side, the American system. And according to the source, the swearing in of a new Fed chair, Kevin Warsh, is actually a giant signal. They see it as a deliberate, calculated regime change away from that British system. Now, to really wrap our heads around this narrative, we have to define exactly what they mean by the American system, right? Because this idea dictates everything else we're going to talk about today. The source defines it as an economic model focused purely on financing actual productivity rather than just pumping out debt. It's all about protecting domestic producers with tariffs and generating credit to rebuild physical manufacturing and infrastructure. The underlying theory they're pushing here is that the current administration is actively, right now, working to make this exact model a reality. All right, moving right along to Section 2, bypassing the Federal Reserve and creating parallel credits. So how does this actually work in practice? Well, the narrative suggests the strategy is to build parallel credit institutions tucked away inside different government agencies, kind of like mini national banks, if you will. We're talking about the Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital, projects like Project Vault for strategic minerals processing, and various public-private partnerships over at the Department of Energy. The whole goal, the speakers argue, is to set up alternate channels of credit that flow straight into the productive economy, completely bypassing the traditional Federal Reserve structure. And while they're doing that, they claim the Office of Financial Accountability is being used to actively hunt down and shut off globalist dirty money flows. And to give you a sense of the sheer scale of these parallel structures, just look at this number. $200 billion. The source points specifically to this massive allocation for the Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital. That is $200 billion designed specifically to pump credit directly into the defense production industry. It's huge. Which brings us to Section 3, rebuilding the American system and prioritizing productivity over debt. There's an elephant in the room here, right? The national debt. But the framework presented argues that the strategy isn't to just magically cancel or repudiate the debt, which, let's face it, could instantly crash the economy. Instead, the plan is simply this. We're not going to repudiate our debt, we're going to build our way out of it. But how exactly do you do that? Well, the speakers point to folks like Kevin Warsh at the Fed and Scott Bessent at the Treasury. They allegedly believe that artificial intelligence is going to absolutely skyrocket the productivity of the American workforce. And if you have sky-high productivity, the theory goes, you can run an economy with super low interest rates without ever leaning on the Fed. You basically just grow the economy right out of its own debt hole. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Section 4, the political donor battlefield and congressional loyalties. So how do these massive global macroeconomic theories actually play out on the ground? The source makes a really fascinating hard pivot here to a specific congressional primary in Kentucky involving Thomas Massie. They point out that even though Massie is super popular in some circles as Mr. No, he voted against key policies of this so-called American system. And the source untangles this incredibly complex web of donor ties, noting that billionaire Jeff Yass heavily funded Massie while supposedly playing multiple sides of the political spectrum. But here's the real kicker. The source argues that the old left versus right metric is completely gone. According to this explainer material, the brand new metric for political survival is strict, absolute loyalty to the president's economic agenda, period. And that leads us right into Section 5, media distractions, psyops, and the information war. The source uses the recent resignation of Tulsi Gabbard as their primary case study for what they call psychological warfare. Let's walk through how they say this played out. Step 1. Big social media figures start spreading rumors that Gabbard was being forced out. Step 2, the internet grabs hold of it, and suddenly this narrative explodes into rumors of a massive, shadowy political takedown or some crazy CIA operation. But then you hit step 3. The official resignation letter drops, and it reveals the actual, heartbreaking, real-world truth. She resigned because her husband was diagnosed with bone cancer. The speakers emphasize how this viral, manufactured internet outrage just completely buried the actual human reality of the situation. In fact, the source goes so far as to call this endless churn of social media outrage a deliberate psychological operation. And the endgame? To disorient people, to make voters feel totally defeated and ultimately convince them to just stay home during the critical upcoming midterms instead of going out to vote to sustain these big American system economic changes. Which brings us to our final stop. Section 6, returning to the real world. Factories versus feeds. The whole argument here is that true economic progress, you aren't going to find it in the instant gratification of scrolling on your phone. Real progress takes time, and it's happening in tangible, physical sectors. According to the narrative, the administration is busy building actual factories, battling massive meat cartels to protect local ranchers, fighting back against institutional investors who are gobbling up single-family homes, and taking big pharma head-on. The source draws a really sharp contrast here between this slow, foundational, real-world work and the constant demand for instantaneous results that social media culture thrives on. So, the source has a really clear directive for their audience: disconnect. They literally ask this question: is the real world what your social media feed tells you, or is the real world the factories that are being built? They're urging people to stop staring at their screens and start looking at direct government actions. Go read the actual policy findings right on the agency websites. For these speakers, the upcoming midterms are framed 100% as a battle for the return of the real world. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, pretty provocative thought. We've just traced this highly complex narrative. We're talking global banking structures, parallel credit lines, shifting congressional loyalties, and supposed psyops. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to the individuals standing at the ballot box. Will voters be swayed by the immediate, daily outrage cycle on their feeds, or will I be moved by the slow, structural, real-world changes promised by this so-called American system? It is a fascinating question, and honestly, we're all going to have to watch it unfold together. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.